Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump's use of sweeping tariffs faced sharp questioning at the Supreme Court. Major justices, including several conservatives, expressed doubts about the White House's justification of the import duties. Meanwhile, the Federal Aviation Administration reduces flight capacity by 10% at 40 major airports. This move that could cut thousands of flights per day will go into effect on Friday morning as per FAA. Russian air defense forces have intercepted over 75 Ukrainian drones overnight as per the defense ministry. The ministry reported that 49 drones alone were destroyed over the Volgograd region. The European Union has urged Russia to stop making nuclear threats and has called on all parties to avoid actions that could lead to a new arms race. This comes as Russian president ordered plans for a possible nuclear test. Israeli authorities have confirmed that the remains of a hostage returned from Gaza is of a Tanzanian agricultural student, Joshua Loitu Molel, who was reportedly taken hostage in October 2023. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has called for sexual harassment to be made a crime nationwide after being groped by a man in broad daylight. Sheinbaum has also pressed charges against the man. Asia's most powerful tropical storm this year, Typhoon Kalmaegi, has made landfall in Vietnam. Kalmaegi has already killed at least 114 people and downed entire towns in Philippines. A Dutch appeals court has rejected a bid to stop Netherlands' arms exports to Israel and trading with Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian territories. The court in The Hague has also stated that the Dutch government already did enough to discourage companies from working in the occupied territories. Now we move on. Russian forces have advanced in the battered Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk and are fighting house-to-house battles in a bid to eject Ukrainian forces from the city. According to Moscow, taking Pokrovsk is the gateway to Donetsk, and it would give Russia a platform to drive north towards the two biggest remaining Ukrainian-controlled cities in the Donetsk region, which are Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. Meanwhile, Kyiv has acknowledged that the situation in Pokrovsk has become difficult in recent days, but its troops are still fighting there, and it denies that they are surrounded by Russian forces. Russia has also stated that it has captured 64 buildings in the city over the past 24 hours, which were once home to 60,000 people, and repelled Ukrainian attacks from Hirshine to the west. Russian forces are just a few kilometers away from closing their pincer movement around Pokrovsk and neighboring Mirnohrad, and are also closing in on Ukrainian forces in the Kupiansk and the Kharkiv region. Now we move on. In South Africa, the government has stated that it will investigate how 17 of its citizens joined mercenary forces in the Russia-Ukraine conflict after the men sent distress calls for help to return home. According to a statement issued by South Africa's presidency, the men were lured into fighting under the pretext of lucrative employment contracts. All men are between the ages of 20 to 39 years and are trapped in Ukraine's Donbas region. Although the presidency statement did not say which side the men were fighting on. However, in August, South Africa's government warned young people to be wary of fake job offers in Russia, which were circulating on social media, after reports that some South African women had been tricked into making drones. Now we move back to Russia and Ukraine. Actress and humanitarian Angelina Jolie has recently visited Kherson and Mykolaiv in southern Ukraine, meeting medical staff, local families, and volunteers. In a statement released by the Legacy of War Foundation on Thursday, Jolie has expressed her gratitude to the organizations she met during her visit, as well as the foundation for their support. This marks her second visit to Ukraine following a 2022 trip to Lviv, where she met displaced individuals affected by the ongoing war with Russia. Now we move on. The European Union has urged Russia to stop making nuclear threats and called on all parties to avoid actions that could spark new arms race. The statement comes a day after Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered officials to draft plans for a possible nuclear test, which will be Moscow's first test since 1991. His move follows U.S. President Donald Trump's comments at the APEC summit earlier, where he announced plans for the United States to resume nuclear testing, citing the need to maintain strategic superiority. The developments have raised alarm among global powers, reviving Cold War-era concerns about the future of nuclear stability. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Georgy Toleraya. He's a professor at Russia Academy of Science, joins us live from Moscow. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Professor, how do you analyze the current situation? Do you think arms race, particularly about nuclear military weapons, has started already or started again?
Well, first of all, I don't quite understand the lead to this comment because I'm not quite aware what exactly Europe is demanding from whom. They look like they address Russia, although Russia was not going and is not going so far to proceed to any nuclear tests. The president just instructed his staff to study the possibility, and in fact, our capacity to do this. There are no concrete plans so far. It's the U.S., Donald Trump, who have instructed his government to conduct nuclear tests. So any protests, if anybody is concerned, should be addressed to U.S. If U.S. won't test, Russia won't test either. Of course, if the U.S. will test and Russia will reciprocate, that would mean a new nuclear race, and it would be very dangerous. Of course, nobody in Russia is happy with this. But we think that the ball is squarely in U.S. court. They should be stopped from doing the testing and doing other things which could endanger the existing balance between the nuclear powers. I think that's quite obvious.
Yes, Professor, I agree with you. U.S. should be stopped, but who will stop U.S.? Do you have any power or anyone in mind?
Well, I think that the whole world is interested in stopping the U.S. at this point. Not only the nuclear powers, but the whole world community, all the 195 countries or 94 countries members of the UN should appeal to the US not to do this. That would be fair, because if US won't resume nuclear tests, well, nobody will.
Do you think UN still has the legitimacy or still has that kind of power that it can stop something like this?
Well, UN certainly has the legitimacy because it's the unique and the only universal international organization which unites all the countries, and their voice, although it might be not strong enough to stop any country of doing something, I think it would be heard by everybody. So the position of all the countries is important, and after that, of course, U.S. may consider or not consider this appeal, but this is something that everybody can do. And how else is it possible to stop Donald Trump if he made the decision which is in his competence and he instructs his staff to do this, well, the government has to obey the Supreme Commander and the elected president. The other issue is that it's maybe not possible for the government to do this, that the US might have no capacity to do this. Then there will be a good excuse for Trump to reconsider. Well, maybe in accordance with the appeal of the global community.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Professor Georgi Tolaraya for joining us all the way from Moscow and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. China and the United Kingdom have agreed to properly handle so-called occasional noises and disturbance in their bilateral relationship. This comes as Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi engaged with Britain's Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper in a telephonic conversation earlier today. During the call, Wang has reportedly stated that it is normal for the two countries to have differences. However, he has emphasized the need for enhancing strategic communications to safeguard ties between China and the UK. Additionally, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has stated that China is ready to work with Britain to address global challenges. As per latest sources, both sides have agreed to make efforts to resolve urgent issues impacting their relations. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Andrew Latham. He's a professor of international relations, joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Professor, how can China and UK balance managing bilateral tensions while pursuing cooperation on global challenges?
On the one hand, they have a shared interest in, especially at this moment, which is sort of a détente moment between China and the West, of managing and mitigating the tensions, the frictions between the two countries. Minor frictions, whether it's rhetorical, diplomatic speak frictions, or whether it's minor trade issues. They have an interest in dialing down the tension between the two. That's clear. What's not being addressed in this communique, in this statement, is the deep structural differences, persistent and deep structural differences between these two countries, whether it's at the level of values, a liberal democracy, imperfect, but a liberal democracy versus China's more authoritarian approach to governance, and also geopolitically in this era of great power competition, really between Team USA and Team China, with some countries like India opting for strategic autonomy. The UK is clearly on the American team, and therefore is going to end up, along with the Americans, butting heads, as it were, with the People's Republic of China from time to time. So to the extent that, and this echoes the realities back during détente in the Cold War era, to the extent that minor frictions can be negotiated away, noise can be negotiated away, the chance of that escalating to something bigger goes down dramatically, and that's very good for strategic stability. But it's also good for the UK in terms of their economic relations with China. They don't want too much turbulence in that relationship, given how important it is to them. And it also has to be said that China likes to position itself as a responsible member of the international community, and looking at the Americans as the aggressors and difficult and all the rest of that. And this is Wang Yi, the foreign minister, saying, look at us, we're the good guys here.
And Professor, this agreement to properly handle occasional disturbances signal a shift in China-UK relations toward more stable engagement.
Yes, I mean, those relations have been good for a long time, goodish. But occasionally issues pop up, especially around trade and especially around human rights and things like that. And occasionally there are disputes between the two. And both sides have signaled that they would rather handle those diplomatically and constructively, not let them escalate, because both sides, as I said, have an interest in having a stable, productive relationship, even if, at a very deep level, they're simply not going to be playing for the same team going forward. So I think it's a positive development. I don't think it changes the fundamentals of geopolitics and grand strategy, but it helps us manage the normal frictions between important players on the world stage.
How do you think, how might domestic political pressures in both these differences in these both countries, as you also mentioned, there's human rights and also ideologies different. How do you think these will play out in their engagements, future engagements?
Well, I expect China to repeat the line that it often repeats, is that countries are all sovereign, their internal affairs are nobody else's business, and how China conducts its political business and how it deals with dissenters, et cetera, is nobody else's business. And the UK should not be wagging its finger at the People's Republic because it doesn't approve of their governance system or their human rights or what's going on in Hong Kong on any given day. And so we're likely to hear more of that. The UK, on the other hand, especially the Keir Starmer government, the Labour government, is given to public pronouncements of moral virtue on the world stage. And so is not likely to, and that's part of its governing coalition. Its legitimacy with its governing coalition is that it speaks truth to power. And that's not going to go away. The United Kingdom will continue to speak truth to Chinese power. But perhaps there'll be a little less finger wagging going forward.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Andrew Latham for joining us and sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for another discussion. Now, moving on, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has pressed charges after being grouped on the streets near Mexico's National Palace. She has stated that the assault reflects the daily reality faced by women across the country. In a video circulating online of the incident that shows a man appearing to touch Sheinbaum and leans on her as she was taking a walk from the National Palace to the Education Ministry amid a political rally. Sheinbaum has pushed the man's hands away and continued walking. Giving further details on the incident, Sheinbaum has stated that the man appeared to be intoxicated, drunk. The Mexico City Mayor Clara Brugada has stated that the man is now being arrested. Meanwhile, speaking on the incident, Sheinbaum has mentioned that she has experienced harassment before as a student as well. That she will not increase her security or change how she moves in public spaces. Let's in fact listen into what the Mexican president has said.
La segunda es este lamentable episodio que ocurrió caminando de aquí de Palacio Nacional a la SEP. ¿Por qué me fui caminando? Porque es más corto, no tiene ninguna otra explicación. Si salimos en auto, se nos había hecho tarde, si salíamos en auto íbamos a llegar.
The incident puts the focus on Mexico's troubling record on women's safety, with sexual harassment in common places and rights groups warning of a femicide crisis. According to United Nations data, around 70% of Mexican women aged 15 and over experience at least one incident of sexual harassment in their lives. Here's how Mexican women have reacted to Sheinbaum's harassment incident.
Una falta de respeto simplemente por el hecho de ser mujer, y bueno, también a cualquier hombre, pero más por la investidura que representa la presidenta, ¿no? Mucho más grave, para mí se me hace grave en el metro, en cualquier lugar, que a una mujer traten de acosarla, porque a mí alguna vez me pasó de adolescente, me pasó y es horrible, pero en ese entonces todo el mundo se quedaba callado, no decía nada, y lo escondías porque te daba pena.
Es algo muy común y creo que debe dejar de normalizarse. Hay que hacer la denuncia de que esto no está bien. No está bien que nos estén tocando y que sienta que porque andamos en la calle pueden tocar nuestro cuerpo. Eso no está bien.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee. She's a former Indian ambassador, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Ambassador, how does this assault on President Sheinbaum reflects broader issues of gender-based violence, not just in Mexico, but all over the world, including India?
It is a truly shocking incident, and it is a sharp reminder that women everywhere are victims of such incidents, whether at the lowest or the highest level. They are victims of war, they are raped, they are assaulted, they are made sexual slaves, and this is true, unfortunately, for millennia globally. In this particular case, it is even more shocking because the incident involves the head of state of Mexico. She is a remarkably brave lady to have said that she will not change her daily routine. But if I was in charge of her personal security, I would definitely upgrade it, because if the president of Mexico can be groped in a public place while walking from her residence to a place to address a public rally, she could also very well be assassinated. It shows that she does not have adequate security. So I would urge her to reconsider her decision, because she obviously needs much better and higher level security. At the same time, I would like to share that in my various postings abroad, I have always been very careful about my personal security when I have been alone. I recall when I went to New York to work in our permanent mission in New York from 86 to 89, I was told by my American friends never to wear a bindi, because they said that for some Americans, unfortunately not well educated, the bindi stands for a tattoo, a religious tattoo, or what they call a Hindu tattoo, and I would be immediately be the subject of assault as well as who knows what else. From 1986 till today, I have not worn a bindi because I got out of the habit, but I have never forgotten. And they used to be called in those days in New York City dot busters, which means they would attack women wearing a bindi. So unfortunately, it's not just confined to any country, as you correctly said. We women have to be very careful of our security wherever we go, especially if we are alone, if it's dark, if there are no lights anywhere. We recently did a program on NewsX about a young woman being assaulted somewhere in the UK under similar circumstances. She was of Indian origin. She was walking down the lane and she was badly assaulted. So we have to be very careful, unfortunately, as women, not because we are the weaker sex, but unfortunately because we are targeted for being women. And I must express my admiration to the Mexican president and all the women who spoke up in Spanish, which I understand, supporting her, and to say, bravo, she has stood up and shown how courageous women can be under such situations which can occur to any of us. I hope not to you because you're very young, but it can happen to any of us anytime, because we are always singled out and attacked in vulnerable situations. Asuma.
Yes, Ambassador, thank you. I do take precautions as well in my dressing, and thank you very much for sharing such personal story about your bindi story, and it really shows the changes that women have to make to protect ourselves. And looking back at this news, what role should government leaders play in addressing sexual harassment as well as femicide at a national policy level, not just after something like this takes place, but especially after something like this takes place?
Well, they just have to upgrade security, but as I've always told, when I have mentored young women diplomats in India, I have always told them that we are all emancipated, liberated women, but we must be aware of the fact that we need to take extra security when we are alone, because we could be singled out. Therefore, it doesn't make sense, for instance, to go to a country where women don't have equal rights and wear a mini skirt. It doesn't make any sense. We are liberated, but it's not safe for you to wear a mini skirt. So dress properly and don't ever allow yourself to be the focus of attention in such places. Just blend with the crowd. That is what I have always followed, and I have been as a diplomat to dangerous situations and to countries where women are not given equal rights. I won't name any of them. And I have always been extra careful. If I've been told to wear a scarf around my head because it's the done thing to do, I have worn the scarf. I have told myself I will never do that in India, but I'm not in India. I have to do it. I'll do it. So my suggestion particularly to professional women, including diplomats, etc., is just go with the flow. Never stand out. never be singled out, because then you are increasing the danger to yourself. And since we are not all black belt judo players, etc., something horrible can happen to one of us anytime, so we have to be extra careful. That would be my suggestion to you also, my dear. Just be careful and dress for the occasion, and remember, it doesn't take away your emancipated status. You are just playing safe. Much better in these troubled times to play safe and not be sorry. That is the advice I would give as an emancipated woman diplomat.
Yes, 100%, Ambassador. Thank you very much for advising not just me, but all professional women out there to play it safe on any time. Thank you very much, Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee, for joining us as a former Indian ambassador and sharing that insight. Now we stay in the region. Peru's government will decide this week whether to grant safe passage to Betsy Chavez, an opposition politician holed up at the Mexican embassy in Lima. Chavez faces charges for her alleged role in Castillo's attempt to dissolve Congress in 2022. Despite the diplomatic break, officials are working to minimize the economic impact of the dispute. Meanwhile, Peru has severed diplomatic ties with Mexico after the latter granted asylum to Betsy Chavez, who was former President Pedro Castillo's last prime minister. Foreign Minister Hugo de Zilla has stated that legal experts are reviewing the 1954 Caracas Convention, which Mexico cited in its decision. A final decision on Chavez is expected by the end of this week. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Andrew Latham. He's a professor of international relations, joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us. Professor, looking at this, how might Peru's decision on granting a safe passage to Betsy Chavez affect their relations with Mexico?
Well, the relations economically are quite close between the two countries, and neither side, I think, has an interest in upsetting that particular apple cart. But there are other issues at play. Mexico has been accused of interfering in the internal affairs of Peru by backing Castillo and Chavez and various opposition groups. And of course, the Peruvian government doesn't like that. And it has some grounds, it has a leg to stand on there. It is not right for one country to interfere in the internal affairs of another. But there's a cross-cutting dynamic as well, which is that under the 1954 Caracas Treaty, but also other diplomatic, the Montreal Convention, etc., if one embassy grants asylum to a member of a country, they're entitled to do that, and that person who's been granted asylum is entitled to free passage out of the country. Now, that's under some dispute here. The Peruvians are saying, well, we might not grant free passage, because how else would you get the person out of the Mexican embassy in Peru back to Mexico? And the Mexicans are saying, we have rights under international law, and you have to observe and honor those rights and allow us to take this person out of this embassy and take her back to Mexico. So there are a number of cross-cutting currents here and dynamics. I think given the deep economic relationship between the two countries, they'll probably find some mutually acceptable way of dealing with this issue, but I think they're in for a little bit of turbulence between now and next week.
Right, and also, what are the political implications of granting asylum to opposition figures involved in past governmental crises, in this case Peru and Mexico, and how should governments balance their legal obligations with national security and political stability?
Well, I think initially had the Peruvian government said, okay, the Treaty of Caracas is in effect and there's the international law, we don't like it, but we're not going to make a big deal of it. But they did make a big deal of it, and now it's difficult for them to back down because it looks like, A, they're giving in to the Mexican government, and it might even embolden domestic opposition parties who are looking at this and saying, oh, the Peruvian government is weak. We can do whatever it is we want to displace them, overthrow them, defeat them at the polls, whatever. So I think the Peruvian government now has backed itself into a corner, as it were. They should have just let this go away and not made a big deal of it. But now that they have, the stakes for both sides, the Mexicans and the Peruvians, are high. That makes backing down more difficult. But I still think they have to balance their economic relations against that. And I still think there'll be an off-ramp, some way of getting themselves out of this predicament.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Angie Latham for joining us and sharing that insight throughout our news all the way from Minneapolis.